Hey y'all, it's Jennifer. Welcome back to my channel. Today I am coming to you with a weekly reading vlog. I initially thought about theming this reading vlog around Halloween, and in fact I started a reading vlog last week that was entirely Halloween based, and then everything that I was reading was such an utter disappointment to me, and I just really don't have the energy to talk about books that I don't like. So I decided to scrap that entirely, and hopefully the rest of the books that are on kind of my spooky reading TBR, hopefully they're not going to disappoint me. I really also thought this was going to be pretty themed around vampires, but in fact, I am currently in the middle of a book about witches. So I'm currently reading The Once and Future Witches by Alix Harrow. I have maybe 150 pages left, so I think this is going to be a book that I finish pretty quickly. I may even finish it tonight. And this is one that I am so glad I took a chance on. I had a good feeling about it because I really enjoyed The 10,000 Doors of January, which was Alix Harrow's debut novel, and I enjoyed it. I did feel as though it lost its way a bit. It lost the plot and the characterization a little bit in the second half, and that really made me wary of this. So I didn't pick this up last year when it first came out, but I've seen a lot of people talking about it this Halloween, and so I decided to pick it up. This is historical fantasy that's set in the 1890s, and it focuses on the suffragist movement and on women getting the vote. And it is a really, really fascinating way to incorporate witches is into the suffragist movement, I think, because in so many ways it complements each other very, very well. In other ways, I think it kind of cheapens the actual history. And I had a problem with a book that I read that was sort of similar to this actually, earlier in the year, that was a historical fantasy that was set during the French Revolution, but it dealt pretty blatantly with actual historical figures and made them magicians. And I had a lot of issues with that, mainly because I thought it cheapened the actual historical events by making them seem magical. And so I thought that might be the case here, and only in a couple of places has that really stuck out to me or felt heavy-handed or felt badly done. I will say though, this is definitely a slower read, and it took a little bit for me to get into it. So this is one that I think if you give it around 100 pages, you'll know whether or not you're going to like it. I just really like her writing style. I just feel like her writing style is actually very nostalgic to me in a weird way. It feels as though I've read her many, many times before, and she feels kind of classic in a weird way to me. And so I just really enjoy reading her writing. And I do feel as though this is a historical fantasy book that has a lot to say and a lot of important things to say. We are officially heading into the week leading up to Halloween, and so I actually don't really know when you will see this vlog. It may actually be totally inappropriate to theme it around spooky reads, because you may or may not see it by then, because I've been having storage issues. My phone has fussed at me quite a bit in recent weeks when I've wanted to edit and upload something, and so I don't know how it's gonna do with a vlog. It really struggled with my last one. So you may or may not see this actually before Halloween, but I'm definitely in the Halloween spirit right now, and I'm often in the Halloween spirit year-round. I can always read about vampires. So the rest of the books that I have here are about vampires. So one of the books that I started in my scrapped vlog is a book that I've decided I needed to take a break from, and that's Empire of the Vampire by Kristoff. It's out of its dust jacket somewhere. It's just a really big book. It's very unwieldy to hold, and I should know this about myself, that it's really difficult for me with large books, but I often feel as though large books are the ones that I really want to collect and I want to have on my shelf. So it's a double-edged sword. I should have got this on ebook, but I didn't know if he would do some weird formatting with it. And in fact, he has. In Nevernight, there were a lot of footnotes, so you were constantly skipping to the bottom of the page, and I imagine in an ebook format that was extremely irritating for people to constantly be clicking on those notes. But in this one, it's actually an illustrated book, so several of the pages are illustrations of scenes that just took place. I don't think that would bug me as much in an ebook because I could just kind of scan over them, but it has been nice to actually see them physically. This is a fantasy book about vampires. It is kind of French based, and a guy is essentially sitting down and telling his life story before he is going to be executed. He's kind of the last of his kind, and I am just now coming off of a reread of Interview with the Vampire, and I have an entire themed vlog around that, which should already be out by now. And I think I am just now seeing a whole lot of similarities between the structure of this book and Interview, and I kind of like that. I won't say that it bothers me. I kind of like that because I was on a high after reading Interview, and I immediately wanted to read something else just like it. And so in many ways, this feels structurally as though it's going to be very similar, but it also is very kind of thematically similar because it's dealing quite a bit with religion. And so it's interesting that this is apparently in a fantasy world, but Christianity is very present. So I'm not really totally sure if this is supposedly taking place in our world like centuries from now or what, but I kind of struggle with that. Pick one. You know, pick one. If you were gonna go for a full fantasy world, then you need to go with it. You need to run with it. So I often struggle with that. Sometimes it can be done very, very well. But here I feel as though he wanted to do some things that he couldn't do in the real world. And so he set it in a fantasy world, but he also really wanted to make a lot of comments on the church. And he couldn't do that through a fantasy church, I guess. I'm not very far into this, and so maybe there is quite a bit of difference between the religion of Empire of the Vampire and the Catholic Church that I think he's kind of playing with here. But it's a 750-page beast, and it's gonna take me some time to get through. And so I don't know if I'll actually finish it this week or not. But I do kind of have to laugh because, like, on page 5 of this book, people were smoking powdered blood out of a pipe and kind of getting high off of it. And I was like, what is this? This is ridiculous. And then I told myself, I was like, remember who's writing this, Jenny? Who's writing this? It's Kristoff, and we have to have an aesthetic. And so definitely there is an aesthetic here, and it's not one that I'm necessarily agreeing with thus far, but I do just love vampires. So hopefully I'm probably just going to enjoy it because it is about vampires. So I'm looking forward to getting further into this and seeing how I feel. I've actually seen very few people talking about this, and very few people talking about it spoilery. So I really do not know what to expect here, and I'm kind of excited by that. I, like everyone else on BookTube, am also very interested in reading the Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires by Grady Hendrix. And I went on a massive scavenger hunt for this book. It was sold out at Barnes & Noble last week. I went to Barnes & Noble specifically to pick it up. They didn't have it, didn't know when it would be coming in. I looked online at places. It's out of stock everywhere. They don't know when it's coming in. Miraculously, my local Target had one copy. So hopefully it is a sign that the book really is as good as I've heard it is. And so everyone is apparently flocking out to get it, to read it this week and to lead up to Halloween. But this is about a Southern book club, and they believe a vampire has come into town. And I just don't think it gets any better than that. I'm expecting this to just be also really nostalgic for me. In a weird way, Alix E. Harrow's writing has felt very nostalgic to me, but I think this tonally will feel like that because I just really associate vampires with the South, and especially because when I was in high school, I just read and reread over and over again the Sookie Stackhouse series by Charlaine Harris. And that series was a really great blend of romance, a little bit of horror, but it was also genuinely funny, and it was also a genuinely good look into Southern life. I always felt like that series got it. I think a lot of books that try to touch on the South are ham-fisted and are clearly written by people who visited the South but not really lived there. And so this is one that I think is probably going to be a pretty genuine representation of Southern ladies, as I believe Grady Hendrix is from Charleston. So I feel like I'm in good hands here. I think I'm just really going to enjoy this, and I hope I do, because I've been intrigued by Grady Hendrix's other books. And so hopefully I like this, and I'll have found a new horror writer to read. Last but not least of the books that are kind of on my maybe list for the week is A Dowry of Blood by S.T. Gibson. This has been making the rounds for a few months now, and I am incredibly intrigued by it. And so this is a book that focuses on one of the brides of Dracula, and I believe it really examines the relationship between the brides and Dracula and how there's quite a bit of abuse there and there's quite a bit of manipulation there. So I'm really intrigued by this. People say it is beautifully written. It's very, very short. So hopefully it is something that I can maybe squeeze in between a couple of other of these books. But I'm excited about it because this is one I have heard legitimately nothing but good things about. And also just look at that cover. It's so dreamy. I love that cover so much. So those are my options, and that's what I'm currently reading. Hopefully you will get some nice B-roll of some pumpkins to kind of get into an autumnal, spooky atmosphere. But this week, I'm probably really not going to be doing anything truly Halloween. This has been a weird Halloween season for me, is that it's really not felt like Halloween at all, and I can't even remember doing anything that I normally associate with Halloween. I did have a family gathering over the weekend, and we kind of had a semi-Halloween party. We had Halloween snacks, and I'll insert a clip of that here if I can, because it was really, really cute. But essentially what we did at this gathering is we finally went through quite a few of my grandmother's things. So last January, my grandmother, who was 91, she passed away in January, and thus right when all of this stuff with COVID started happening, everything that we were trying to do, trying to organize and going through her things and moving things around, everything was essentially put on pause, and nobody did anything because nobody was traveling. We didn't really have an opportunity to go through much of it until now. But so one of my goals this week is essentially going to be to go through everything I took. When people said they didn't want anything, I took it, and so I'm not really sure what I wound up with. My mom took a lot of stuff because she is a scrapbooker, and I think that'll be really great because I think the majority of the stuff that we have is pictures. So that's something I'm hoping to do in particular, is go through the photographs and see if I can suss out who people are. That is one of the sad things about actually both sides of my family, is that we don't really know who people are after a certain point. And in years past, when I asked my grandmother if she knew who some of these people were, she had plumb forgot. So this is going to be solving a mystery, I think, and it's also going to be a lot of fun. I'm really looking forward to going through her photographs and seeing pictures of my mom when she was little. I can't show you those because my mom is like adamant that she is never on YouTube, but I'm going to go through, see if we have duplicates of anything, make choices about duplicates, sadly enough, and then hopefully tell her some of the things I think she should prioritize to scrapbook and put in acid-free kind of containers, because as an archivist, this is forefront in my mind. I started out working in photographs. When I started out as an archivist, when I was a student worker, I worked with photographs. And so that is one thing I have to say I feel pretty confident about, and that I feel very passionately about, is preserving photography. And if you were somebody who was a scrapbooker back in the 70s and 80s, I got news for you. Those scrapbooks that you used with the sticky paper, just sticking them down into a book, you might want to go back over those. They're going to fade after time. And so I'm going to go through and rescue things. So hopefully I can take you along with me. So as I'm doing that, I guess I should probably listen to an audiobook. I'm not sure what I'll pick. I don't know of anything kind of Halloween-y to choose. So I'll let you know if I choose that. But here is just a sneak peek of what you're going to see. This is me. I don't know how old I was, but here I was. This was on my grandmother's dresser. And I look the literal same. That's what scares me, is when I see pictures of myself, I just got bangs cut and everything, and I'm like, I literally look exactly the same as I did when I was 5 or 6 years old. Some people really changed from children to adulthood. I don't feel as though I have. And you might not be able to see this very well, but that's my grandmother at the beach. This is gonna be really fun. I think there's gonna be a lot of good stuff here. One of the most exciting finds, I'll go on and tell you, we found her journal. So she had a 5-year journal. from 1940 to 1945, which, as you can imagine, was a great find because those are the World War II years for America. We didn't enter the war until 1942, but we were aware it was going on and were paying attention to it. My grandmother, for the most part, was not. She was out dating, and so she was really concerned about all the boys she knew. But she had a really great entry when the war ended, saying that the war with Germany had ended. Everyone was so happy. She had another entry about President Roosevelt's death, which was really, really exciting to come across. My grandmother lived in a small country town here in North Carolina, and so it's just amazing to think that growing up she was observing everything. So hopefully I will show that to you. We got a lot of stuff here. I probably really should pick out an audiobook because it's going to take a long time to go through this, and it won't all get done over the next few days, but hopefully I can carry you along with me, and maybe we can also try to fit in some spooky things. It's time to get into a spooky mood. We need to be watching some spooky, scary movies, and since I am on a bit of a vampire kick, I think we should be watching vampire films. If you have a favorite vampire film, let me know it down below. In a weird way, I want to say my favorite vampire movie is Lost Boys from 1987 because I love the aesthetic of it, but I don't know. I just really truly love the Van Helsing movie with Hugh Jackman in it. It's iconic. It's so good. Amazing. That's one of my favorites. I love Fright Night, another one of my favorites. So we could just be here forever talking about vampire movies. So I would love to know down below if you have any Halloween traditions. Are there snacks that you like to have on Halloween? Since Halloween is on a weekend, maybe I'll have some Halloween goodies and I will carry you along for that. But we've got a lot of work to do and it's time to get started. So I am updating you from the couch, which is kind of unusual, but the light is so weird. My normal vlog spot with the tree just looks completely and totally washed out. So update on the picture project. I went through and salvaged a family photo album that my grandmother was keeping. That was one of those adhesive photo albums, and I'm telling you, if you have any of those, you might want to go through them and just save the pictures that you really, really want. At some point, those books cause everything to fade really, really badly. That was, of course, what people had at the time, but that really causes pictures to fade pretty rapidly over the years. In this case, it really didn't. So I'm pretty shocked about that. I'm pretty happy about it. And I removed all of the pictures that I thought we might want, and I dated them. They were from the early 80s, so not as old as some of the other pictures. So this is a picture apparently of my great-grandfather, so my grandmother's father. And this was apparently taken in 1914, which is pretty incredible. Somebody else dated this one, thank goodness. So that's him on his car, which was apparently a big talk. So that's a pretty amazing picture, and I love what he has on. I think the Gilded Age, the Edwardian period, whatever you would call this, kind of the pre-World War I period, was a great time for fashion. I mean, it really, truly was. And here is my grandmother at the beach looking super cute. Half the pictures that I found have been, of course, at the beach. We are a beach-going family. In North Carolina, you have both the mountains and the beach, pretty luckily. And my family is really a beach family, and I prefer the beach. Really, if you told me I couldn't go back to the mountains, I wouldn't sweat that. I haven't been to the mountains in years. But when I can't go to the beach, I'm really sad about it. So half these pictures have been from the beach. This one might be dated. Some of these were April 55, so 1955. Also from 1955, there is my grandmother standing outside, also looking really cute. Great fashion sense. So that's going. This is not going to be a project that gets done in a week or a weekend. I think in general, I'm going to have to call this maybe more broadly like a wintertime project, going through and organizing all of this stuff, because I really want to make sure everything is dated that can be dated, and everyone in the pictures that I know can be identified before we move on to the next thing. And the majority of what I took and what wound up in our hands are pictures. And sadly, at this point, a lot of people can't be identified, and I'm just being, I mean, it seems callous to me, but I'm just getting rid of stuff of people I don't know. I don't know who they are, and I really don't have any sort of avenue to find out who they were. So that's been kind of a difficult thing. It feels wrong to do, really. But I finished The Once and Future Witches, and I really, really enjoyed it. The second half of the book was actually far better than the first half. And so it did start out slow, I think I mentioned, and I would definitely be aware of that going into it, that it is definitely a slower start, and it's kind of a build, but I think it's really worthwhile. It's great to me to read a standalone fantasy, and I think that's probably why the first half was a little bit slower, was that she included everything in one book rather than letting it spill into a duology. But there's a real fairy tale quality to Alix Harrow's writing, and there was a real fairy tale vibe to the book in general, and I just really enjoyed it. So she might be kind of an auto-buy author for me now, because I really enjoyed the 10,000 Doors of January. I do think that it went off script a bit, and it really changed in the second half. This book did as well, but to me it became a stronger book in the second half. So I'm really curious about her, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what else comes from her. I've started 2 other books. I'm essentially just considering Empire of the Vampire to be sat down for the time being. It's just so big, so I think I'm gonna read a couple of more smaller things before I dive back into that one. So I started A Dowry of Blood, and I am really not enjoying this. I really don't like it. In fact, I'm considering DNFing it. I'm halfway through, and it's just so boring. And it's odd to say that because the book is paced so weirdly. It feels as though things are moving way too rapidly. Things are happening far too fast in the book. And so you don't really have a handle on the characters. And the book is working with the assumption that you, of course, know Dracula. And so you don't really need a build for his character, which is probably true. But you don't know the other characters, and you specifically don't feel as though you know Constanta, the main character who is telling this story. Everything feels at arm's length. And I'd also heard quite a bit about the language, that it was apparently very beautifully written. I haven't even found that. I feel like the writing is very hollow, and it's probably because I feel at arm's length from everything happening that it does feel hollow. There are some discrepancies in timeline here. This is kind of moving through history a little bit, and she's not very specific in some ways. In others, she is. And so At one time, I think she has said, okay, this is the 1500s in Spain, and they're at the court of a female ruler of a small section of Spain. And I'm under the impression 1492, Spain and all those disparate little kingdoms finally came together as one whole. And that might be kind of nitpicking it, but I think in general, that's my problem with this book, is that everything feels kind of wishy-washy, or even as though it wasn't really checked over, that it's not something she went over and over and over again, because it just feels as though the characters don't even know themselves, let alone that we as the reader can know them. And so I don't really like it. I'm really not enjoying it, and I think that I might put it down. The unfortunate thing is I had a good feeling about this, and the book that I read last week intending to do a Halloween vlog, The Death of Jane Lawrence, I really thought I was going to like that as well, and I hated that book so much. It completely turned me off of filming a vlog, and I feel similarly here. In a weird way, I don't hate this book, I just don't enjoy it, and I don't find it very compelling to read. Jane Lawrence was such a disappointment to me on every single level. That book I just really, really hated, and it's very rare for me to say that I truly hated a book or disliked it. I disliked Jane Lawrence. In both of these cases, I feel bad that I spent money on the books. Isn't that sad? When a book that you have paid full price for, new, and it is not good, it just feels as though it hurts a little bit worse. If it's a used book that I really didn't pay for and I took a chance on, that doesn't upset me as much, because that was something I was taking a chance on. You take a chance on a new book as well, but you tend to spend far more on them. And so in both of those cases, I wish that I had just waited to get these from my library. I thought, oh wow, I need this for the Halloween season. I thought this was going to set my mood for the second half of October. Both of those books have been real disappointments to me, and I've just talked myself out of finishing this one. So unfortunately, I think this is going on the DNF pile. The cover is so stunning though. And maybe at the end of the day, I just don't really care for Dracula. And I don't care for things that surround Dracula, because I also don't really like the book Dracula. This was just a weird one. It was weird in a lot of ways, and it was also boring in a lot of ways, sadly enough. So I don't really know. Maybe I need to put it down and come back to it at a different time. I always hesitate to DNF something, and I wonder if it's me, if I'm just not in the mood for it. But this one, I just think I'm gonna have to call it. So I did start another book, and I'm hoping to finish it tonight. Maybe not. I do think I have maybe a little less than half left, but I started the Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires, and I'm obsessed with it. Oh my gosh, I'm really, really loving it. So this has just been a delight. I don't necessarily know that I would call it horror, except in a couple of places. It's probably gearing up for something at the very end. But if you didn't know this book was about vampires, I don't think you would know that initially when you go into the book, because it's more of a kind of a mystery setup. And so there have been a couple of instances of real creepiness to me. But for the most part, I just think this is really, really enjoyable. And I think if you're somebody who doesn't typically read horror, which is me, I don't typically read horror because I tend to think that it's going to be really gory and gross. There have been some gross moments in here, but it's not been like what I normally associate with horror. So I think if you were interested in this, but you don't consider yourself a horror reader, I still think you could read it. I might change my mind on that when I finish the book. I'll let you know. But I'm over halfway into it, and I am just really enjoying it. So I'm reading this book alongside my mom, and we do this a lot. If we think a book is going to be one that we both will like, we kind of read it together. And I put that in air quotes because one of us buys a copy of the book, one of us reads it first, and then we automatically pass it on to the next person. So one of us has always finished the book that the other is reading when we're doing this reading together sort of thing. And so she read this before me. And she read it really, really fast, basically in under a day. And I asked her how she felt about it, and she said she wasn't going to tell me until I had finished it, but she would comment on everything as I got to certain parts. So we checked in at big moments, but she still hasn't told me whether or not she really liked it or not. She did tell me she thought the first half was slow. I didn't really find that, but I think it's just because I've been enjoying his writing and I really enjoy the characters. So that might be something to keep in mind, but I'm going to be curious to see how I feel about the end of it. And maybe the ending will change my opinion on the book. I'm not sure, but I'm enjoying this so much. I've ordered 2 more of Grady Hendrix's books. I ordered My Best Friend's Exorcism and The Final Girl Support Group because I can't be stopped. But I really love vampires, and I love vampires in the South. And so I think this works for me in a way that maybe his other books won't, because I just think this is really a fun, almost a trope at this point, to set vampires in the South. And I just really, really enjoy it. There's so much conversation about social mores in the South and how women are treated, how people talk. There's a lot of humor in it too that's really relatable if you're from the South. And I think if you're from the South, you'll recognize these people. You will say, I've definitely interacted with these characters before. And so there's such, you know, an element of I've got to be polite to the point that even if I'm uncomfortable, I have to be welcoming to people, which is something that's definitely ingrained in you in the South, and how you react to people, how you interact with your husband in front of other people, how you interact with your friends, what's appropriate to say. And there's constantly talk about, you know, who's going to what church, which is just so funny. Everything about it is just really delightful. And I like the vampire character. I really like him. I hate to know that he is a vampire, or I'm assuming he is. Could be somebody else, but you know pretty much right off the bat who this person is, and you're suspicious of them, but I kind of like him. One thing I will say is that I just want to go through the pages of this book and fight all of these women's husbands. So they are in a book club, and they are essentially all housewives. So they don't have another job. They are essentially caretakers for their children, and they keep house basically. And so the book club is kind of how they get out and have some wild times in their life by reading murder mysteries and true crime. And their husbands are just so dense, especially once the mystery kicks off and it starts getting going. People are really suspicious of things. The way that they act and the way that they treat their wives, the way that they don't listen to them, I just wanted to go through the page and choke them. And since this is a Southern book, I'll use a Southern saying. In my family, we would say, I'm madder than a wet setting hen. And they do. They make me madder than a wet setting hen. And I always think that's a good sign when an author gets a visceral reaction out of me like that. I think that's definitely the reaction you're meant to be having. This is set in the late 80s and 90s, and so it does definitely feel as though it's from a different time, but it also feels very retro. It almost feels to me in parts when you're reading it that it's not set in the 80s and 90s, but that it's set in maybe the 60s, just in terms of how people relate to one another. There's also just a lot of really great social commentary here, definitely in how the wives and their husbands interact, but also in terms of them being in a really sequestered, nice suburb versus other people in Charleston that are not. I'm still formulating my thoughts here. I'm just really enjoying this. I think this is doing everything that I wanted it to do. It's playing with all of the tropes that I wanted it to play with, and it's commenting on things that I just really enjoy. I think this is a really fun read, but it's also really deep and introspective. I find vampires fascinating, as I'm sure most of you know now. I think just the concept of them is interesting, but I also think the concept of them in the South has been very interesting. And so this has been a really fun book to read. I've read a lot of vampire fiction this month, actually, and I've really enjoyed examining vampires through a multitude of different lenses. Even though I didn't really enjoy A Dowry of Blood, it has been an interesting thought process for me. It was an interesting read, as was Dracula, as was Interview with the Vampire, and definitely as has been Empire of the Vampire. It's interesting to see how vampires have morphed and changed across the centuries and throughout different types of fiction. So I'm just really looking forward to this, finishing this up. Hopefully I can finish it tonight. I don't know, but I'm so excited. I don't know if I'm just going to automatically move on to another one of his books when they get here. Hopefully I will, because I've just really, really enjoyed this. I really like his writing. I think that makes up for the parts of the story that might actually be rather slow is the fact that I just think he's very readable. I'm really curious about the Final Girl support group because there was a lot of talk about that earlier this year when it was published, because Riley Sager wrote kind of a Final Girls book. I have not liked Riley Sager before. I read only one book by him, but I didn't enjoy it. My mom loves Riley Sager, and she's always trying to get me to get into him, but she loved Riley Sager's Final Girl book. And so I'm gonna be curious to see how somebody who read that and loved it, how she'll feel about the Final Girl support group by Grady Hendrix. I'm hoping that I like that. That's not really a horror trope that I get on with. I mean, it is. I'm just not really into slasher films except Scream. I really like Scream, but it seems like Scream is making fun of things like that. So I'm not sure if I'm gonna get everything he's commenting on the way that I do here, because I just know vampires in and out. This has been a very vampiric October and Halloween season for me, and I'm really enjoying it. Maybe I should keep it up throughout the rest of the year. Well, I guess it is time to wrap this vlog up. It is the Saturday before Halloween, and I have finished all of my spooky reading, I think, for the year. Though I'm still kind of in the mood for it, so maybe I'll carry the Halloween spirit into November, into the rest of the year. But I did finish the Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires, and I really, really liked it. I can see what everybody is talking about, but something I do want to warn you. I know I said earlier in the vlog I didn't feel like it was very horror, and if you are not really into horror, you might want to pick this up. It did eventually get there, and it was very, very gross, and I do want to warn there is a scene of sexual assault, and there is also kind of child grooming at play here, which I didn't expect. So I do think it might be worthwhile to know about that before going into the book. But I really, really enjoyed it. I just really liked his writing style. And so I know I told you I ordered 2 more of his books. They were supposed to be here yesterday, and they still haven't arrived. Now they might not arrive until November 2nd. And I thought I might be able to read a couple of more books in this Halloween season, but it doesn't appear to be so. But I would love to know down below if you have read this or if you've read any of Grady Hendrix's other works, because I'm now really into him. I'm glad to have tried him, and I think I made the right decision starting with this book, because I really like vampires, and I like them more and then some of the other horror tropes that I know that he's interested in playing with. So this was just a really enjoyable read, and I think it was perfect for this time of year. At the end of the book, it actually is near Halloween, so it was a really perfect read for this month and for this time of year. I still haven't returned to Empire of the Vampire, and I'm not sure when I will. Hopefully it will be very soon. So I'm planning on maybe getting back into that later today. So as far as the picture project is going, essentially everything had to be moved pretty rapidly the other day because we had some maintenance come in. And so I stopped really in the middle of what I was doing, and I didn't get very far in. As soon as I saw what I was dealing with, and as soon as I saw all of the stuff, I said, it's really gonna take a long time to go through this and organize it. So we've just now started putting things in appropriate piles, so I'll insert some footage here. And we kind of have like photographs of my grandmother. We have photographs of immediate family members, so my mom and her sisters, and then we have kind of the unknowns, which we're just gonna have to get rid of. So this is gonna be a long form project, and like I said, I think it will probably work out to be a project that goes through the winter. I don't foresee myself being able to get back into it, either one of us getting back into it before the end of the year, since we're now kind of in the downward slope. We're going towards Thanksgiving and Christmas. That was kind of my Halloween themed reading vlog. I was really enjoying the spooky reads this week, and I'm sad that I'm gonna have to take down all of my Halloween decorations and put my fall decorations up for just a few weeks, and then it will be Christmas. And I'm kind of to the point that I want to enjoy Christmas for longer than the 4 weeks that we have it. So you never know. I might start putting Christmas stuff up earlier in November than Thanksgiving. I would love to know down below if you've been reading any spooky things for Halloween this year. But that's going to be all for me today. I hope you're all having a great week. Happy reading. Happy Halloween. Goodbye.